I'm a second-generation male who grew up in a maternal-dominated household where whatever mom said goes. She wasn't mean-spirited or anything, it was just that my dad was very passive in nature. I grew up with 3 older siblings, and when it was time for me to go to college, I wanted to get away as far away from home as possible. I got an engineering scholarship at the Baptist Bible University in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. I had lied, left and right, on my entrance applications regarding my faith because I always viewed myself as an atheist, and if I was honest, I would never have gotten the scholarship, which saved me approximately $150,000 in tuition cost. Besides attaining the degree, the other best thing to come out of that school was meeting my now wife, Heather, where we ended up settling down in a small town in Wisconsin with a population of 350 people. My wife, Heather, has a very strong faith, and I guess I've been lying to her as well regarding my lack of faith. She's the oldest of 5 siblings and myself be the youngest in my household, so our personalities seem to mesh well where she naturally bosses me around. Heather found a small Baptist church in our small town where we go every Sunday. The church is painted white where there are about 60 other parishioners and was built in the 1890s. The pastor is in his early 50s and has his own college-age children. I really dread going to church, but I jokingly say to myself that it came along with picking an attractive girlfriend in college. Slightly less boring is my engineering job at the local steel company, where I will never get rich, but at least it has good medical benefits. With both of us being settled in this small town, we were starting to get bored, so Heather made some type of Bible reference that we should be having our own kids, and we've been trying to conceive for what seems like over a year now. I knew we are young, so Heather not being able to get pregnant didn't bother me much, but Heather working at the church-affiliated daycare seemed to constantly remind her of us potentially never being able to have kids. The local area's population really swells during the growing season because of all the migrant workers and their families who flood the area. Our church offers preschool to the migrant families at a really cheap price, so Heather is kept really busy. Then as Heather managed to bite away all her fingernails over the last few months from the stress of not being able to conceive, then at last we finally got the good news we were waiting for when she woke up one morning and got a positive home pregnancy test. I couldn't be any happier as I was going to throw that damn Bible out the window. Heather continued working at the preschool and was even helping Pastor Phil at the church when I had to work later than usual at the steel company. About 6 months into the pregnancy, I started noticing that I was having slight pain below my stomach that was relieved only after I would urinate. I contributed my symptoms to the pregnancy and how I heard that new fathers often gained 50 pounds from the stress of having their first kid, so I just basically ignored the symptoms. After 9 months and 1 week, Heather finally went into labor and we were both pleasantly surprised that we had a girl, which we named Grace. After 2 days at the hospital, we took her home to our 1-level, 2-bedroom ranch home. We had the crib and everything else we needed all ready for the baby. Heather continued to work at the preschool and brought our baby, Grace, as well. After 3 months, everything was going well, where Grace was healthy and Heather was happy, but I still had the persistent issue of the slight pain that was relieved only after urinating. So I decided to go to the urologist, where I discovered that I had a form of benign prostatic hyperplasia or BPH, where a slew of tests were done, and the urologist said I had non-functional testes that produced 0 sperm. My first response to the urologist was, I have a daughter. The urologist responded, you have a congenital condition, meaning since birth you were never going to be able to have children because of your non-functional testes. I was number 12 out of 30 patients this doctor was probably going to see today, so he gave me the half-hearted, if there's anything I could do for you, please let the nurse know. I walked out of the doctor's office a completely defeated person because I had built up such a strong bond with Grace. I drove to a field and called my father, who said he was aware of my issue and they used to sneak me testosterone hormones as a kid because my parents never wanted me to feel weird about myself. What about Grace? I said to my dad. We are so happy that you were able to pull off that miracle, my dad replied. My father doesn't have it in him to hurt a fly, but I wasn't that naive. Just about anyone in town could be the father, from one of the Ukrainian migrant workers to a father at the preschool, to Pastor Phil, to even one of the South American migrant workers, which could also be a possibility. So I looked online at Quora and Reddit to see if any other guy had ever had this same issue, and not surprising, with the hundreds of millions of people in this world, I found someone whose advice was, you weren't going to be able to have your own kids anyway, so what's the difference if she went to the sperm bank or had sex with some John Doe? I figured there was truth in that advice, where I would never be able to give Heather a baby or any other woman, so it'll be best if I just kept my mouth shut and just go along with the flow, like my dad always did. So I went home with my steroid medication for the BPH and told Heather everything was fine, and hugged Grace because she is my daughter. Though I have dark brown hair now, Grace has blonde hair just like I did growing up, but stupid me didn't realize that Heather has blonde hair. However, I never had a reason to doubt that she wasn't my daughter. Regardless, I had to accept that she wasn't mine biologically and move on. I quickly snapped out of my funk and was just happy to have a family. A few days later, I was starting to feel nauseated pretty much every day and all day long. I called the urologist and he said it wasn't from the BPH and was probably stress related. I did find it extremely degrading going to church every Sunday and looking at Pastor Phil, where I would be picturing him and Heather praying a lot with the hopes of helping Heather get pregnant. It just seemed like the nausea was making my everyday decision-making more and more difficult, to the point where I got reprimanded at work for poor work performance. Then when Grace was about 27 weeks old, Heather called and asked me to pick up Grace from the preschool because Grace wasn't feeling well. I was still feeling nauseous myself, but it was the preschool's policy that sick kids had to leave, so I went ahead and picked Grace up. I got to the preschool and exchanged pleasantries with Heather, then I carried Grace to the car and strapped her into the car seat. About 2 minutes into the drive, I looked in the rearview mirror at Grace, and for some reason, she just looked off. She still had blonde hair, but even her hair seemed brighter than usual and her facial features were just off. It was kind of like seeing one of those knockoff He-Man dolls or poorly drawn Mickey Mouses, where you could look at it and say, okay, that kind of looks like a He-Man or a Mickey Mouse, but it's not the real thing. I know I've been feeling awful lately and perhaps my judgment was cloudy, but I just couldn't stop looking in the rear view mirror. But I had to tell myself that Heather was the one who handed me Grace, and I better pull myself together before I get committed to a mental hospital. When I got home, I looked over pictures of Grace and the Grace that I had brought home, and I just felt more and more nauseous. It's difficult because babies' appearances change week to week, and I feel like complete crap for thinking this way, but half of my brain was saying this is not your baby and the other half was saying she has blonde hair as she did when she was born, and Heather handed her to you, so why wouldn't this be your daughter? I put Grace in her crib because she looked tired, and I sat on the couch waiting for Heather to get home just so she could eyeball Grace and I could get some affirmation that baby was actually Grace. After a couple of hours of me sitting on the couch with my stomach turning in knots, Heather came home. Thankfully, she went right to the nursery without me saying, "Can you check and make sure that's the real Grace in the crib?" Heather came out of the nursery holding a half-sleeping Grace, and I guess it was just all in my paranoid head, as Heather didn't have any reservations about this baby not being ours. The days went on, and my stomach issues had actually got much better. Heather was promoted to the manager of the preschool, and I think we were the only family who drove a Tesla in a 100-mile radius of our town. Heather had a knack with money, and she was in charge of all our bills. I thought that she must be doing something right because we were getting takeout food more than we were cooking, and we were planning some really nice vacations. Heather sprung the question on me if I wanted another child, and I just played along with the charade and said, "Sure, why not?" I knew I had zero outcome in this conception process, so I was just going to bury my head in the sand and let her do whatever kept her happy, because I couldn't give her what she needed anyways, and the end result was that my name was going to be on the birth certificates, and I'm the father, and that's all that matters to me. With my fingers crossed, this conception was much faster, which made me question if she wasn't already pregnant before she even asked me my opinion on the pregnancy in the first place. Regardless, it didn't matter because outside of trying to conceive a child, I had no other suspicions that she was sleeping around outside of our marriage. The weeks went on and Grace was getting bigger, and Heather was growing more pregnant. Grace eventually started to walk, and her hair and skin has gotten much darker, so I almost want to eliminate Pastor Phil as being her biological father because the guy has very light blonde hair mixed with white streaks. 9 months later, and our second daughter Abigail was born, who is almost an exact replica of Grace when she was born. Because I'm human, I almost played a game of Clue in my head where I tried to figure out who done it. Meaning who's the actual biological father of Abigail. But this time it was more humorous to me versus causing me anger. It was really like having Grace all over again with Abigail, so I was convinced they both have the same biological father. Heather is 100% Irish with blonde hair and pale skin, which mirrors Abigail, and when Grace was more of a younger infant, so I'm guessing that Grace's father's genetics started to kick in as Grace got older. Just when we were taking our expensive trips to Disney World and enjoying our new home, then my unbearable stomach issues had come back with a vengeance. I hadn't had these stomach pains and nausea in well over a year. It got so bad that I had stayed home from work for a few days. When Heather got home from her preschool job, she was carrying Abigail, who is 5 months now, and Grace came in running through the door. Heather asked me how I was feeling, then told me how hectic the preschool was with the migrant children. I was half out of it with my stomach pains, but she handed me Abigail anyways, where I immediately said, "What the fuck? Excuse me?" Heather replied, "This isn't Abigail. What the fuck is going on? This is the same thing I saw about a year and a half ago with Grace." I responded. Heather looked at me with the most angry eyes and said, "Zach, this is your daughter. I know you're not feeling well, but you're making me feel real uncomfortable by what you are saying." I looked at the baby's hair and I said, "This baby has black-haired roots where I could still smell the bleach. Look at this baby's shirt. You could see where the bleach leached out the red from the shirt." Even though my stomach was hurting, my adrenaline was rushing and I pulled up her shirt and I said, "Heather, this baby doesn't even have a birthmark on her back like Abigail did." Heather's facial expressions quickly changed to where she said, "I can explain." "Explain what? Where is Abigail? Did you do the same thing to Grace?" I said. My stomach pain kicked in again, and I fell back onto the couch. Heather said, "I'll go get Abigail." Then she left the house with both the Abigail and probable Grace imposters home with me. I immediately called 911, and I really didn't know what to tell the dispatcher, especially because I was in so much pain. But I reiterated for them to go to the preschool because something horrible might have happened to Abigail, and I told them about Grace as well. I was in so much pain that I actually passed out on the couch. Fortunately, the police came to my house because of the 2 young kids and I was brought to the emergency department. The ER doctor told me that I was being intentionally poisoned with antifreeze unknowingly by someone for probably days based on my symptoms. I surmised that Heather did this to distract me with the bait and switch with the babies that worked with Grace, but she got caught with Abigail. Because there were so many layers to this case, the FBI got involved. The FBI hasn't been able to track down Heather, and they have no idea of her whereabouts. The fake Abigail was determined to be a migrant mother's baby, where the mother contracted tuberculosis and gave the baby to our Baptist church for an illegal adoption. In turn, Heather kept the baby and, as I suspected, tried to trick me by dyeing her hair blonde. I wish the FBI agent would have just shot me in the head versus what she told me next. Her name was Agent Brodsky, and she put her hand on my right shoulder and said, "Zach, this is going to be really difficult for you to understand, but based on looking at your bank accounts, we suspect that Heather sold her own babies to probably the highest bidder for nothing more than greed and money." I started crying hysterically because I had built up such a bond with the actual Grace and Abigail. I just couldn't believe I married such a monster. All she wanted was that Tesla and whatever else money could buy. Agent Brodsky told me people pay a ton of money for young blonde-haired girls, and there's no way of telling what the highest bidder's motives were for wanting my girls, but assume the worst because no saint is going to partake in illegal deals like these that involved my daughters. After she told me that, I just wanted to burn this house down and anything else associated with the money Heather used to purchase with the sale of our daughters. I called my father and told him about everything, and once again, I should have just had a noose available when my father said, "Yeah, your mother told Heather when you guys were first dating about your testicular issues." I'm amazed your mother never told you. I think you're the only one that doesn't know with your mother's mouth. I really looked around for any sharp objects in this god-forsaken house because that meant Heather intentionally had chosen me years ago, thinking I wouldn't care about her bait and switch with the kids knowing they weren't going to be mine, or perhaps that I would be dumb enough to fall for it, and perhaps for Grace's bait and switch, I did fall for her scheme. I mocked myself and said I guess I fooled her as I put my newly prescribed antidepressants in my mouth to include Lexapro. The silver lining is that the courts have no idea who the fake Grace really is or who her parents are, and because I'm the only father she knows, I got to keep her. I offered to keep the fake Abigail as well, but that's probably not going to happen, and she will likely be returned to Guatemala. I spend my days now searching for the real Grace and Abigail. Every so often I'll see a child that resembles one or both of them, and I have no idea if the kids I see were purchased. The FBI kept Heather's DNA on file in case the real Abigail or Grace were ever returned. The FBI also suspects that other children were bought and sold through the preschool, and the FBI is still trying to determine Pastor Phil's involvement, if there was any at all.